I never intended to become entangled in a conflict with my neighborhood's governing association. My sole desire was to enjoy a serene and tranquil existence on my 5-acre property nestled in the countryside. However, it seems the members of the association's board had other intentions. The entire ordeal began when I decided to erect a modest shed on my land. It was nothing extravagant, just a basic wooden structure intended to store some agricultural tools and materials. I diligently reviewed the county's building regulations to ensure compliance. The permit office approved my plans, so I proceeded with the construction. A few days into the project, there was a knock at my door. Standing outside was Linda, the president of the Neighborhood Association Board. Immediately, she began reprimanding me for not obtaining approval from the Neighborhood Association prior to commencing construction. I calmly clarified that I wasn't actually a member of the Neighborhood Association, hence their permission was unnecessary. This response clearly irritated Linda. She maintained that my property fell under the jurisdiction of the Neighborhood Association, and that I had breached their regulations. I presented her with my property deed and survey map to demonstrate that my land was not included within the association's boundaries. Linda dismissed my evidence and accused me of being uncooperative. She left, demanding that I dismantle the shed or face repercussions. I assumed that would resolve the issue. Unfortunately, I was mistaken. The following day, a police vehicle arrived at my residence. Linda had contacted the authorities, alleging that I was constructing unauthorized buildings on association land. Fortunately, the officer was reasonable. After examining my documentation, he concurred that my property was outside the association's limits. He even apologized for the inconvenience and mentioned he would discuss the misuse of police resources with Linda. Despite this, over the ensuing weeks, the Neighborhood Association Board continued to find new justifications to involve the police. They claimed my dogs were causing excessive noise and that I was improperly disposing of waste when I was merely clearing debris from my yard. Each time the officers would arrive, recognize the frivolous nature of the complaints, and leave, shaking their heads. The minor grievances persisted even after I completed the shed. The Neighborhood Association prohibited me from parking my truck in my own driveway, labeling it as an eyesore. They also demanded that I remove my newly installed deer fence, criticizing its appearance. No matter how many times I demonstrated that the Neighborhood Association had no authority over my property, they persisted. The breaking point came when I decided to install a flagpole and display an American flag on my land. I believed that a touch of patriotism would foster positive relations. This action did not sit well with the Neighborhood Association. Linda stormed to my door, ranting about how my flag contravened the association's regulations regarding lawn decorations. I refused to remove it, and soon after, another police car arrived in response to a baseless complaint. The officer explained he was responding to a report about an unauthorized flagpole and an unsafe flag display. Frustrated, I told him, "Officer, I've had enough of these petty calls. I own this land outright and never agreed to join this neighborhood association. Please ask them to stop wasting your department's time and resources." The officer was understanding and said he would speak with the Neighborhood Association Board once more. He also recommended that I explore legal avenues to halt the harassment. Fed up with the Neighborhood Association's antics, I decided it was time to take a stand. I reached out to a lawyer who assisted me in drafting a cease and desist letter addressed to the Neighborhood Association. The letter detailed all the ways they were overstepping their authority, emphasizing that I was not a member and that they had no jurisdiction over my property. It clearly stated that any further harassment would lead to legal action. I sent the notice via certified mail to ensure proof of receipt. For a few weeks, there was silence, and I hoped the Neighborhood Association had finally understood and would leave me alone. However, such organizations rarely relent easily. I discovered that the Neighborhood Association was revising their bylaws in an attempt to find a loophole that would grant them authority over my land. They were convinced there must be some technicality that allowed them control. It was then I realized I needed to take proactive measures to end this nightmare. I contacted the county's permitting office to file an official complaint against the Neighborhood Association for harassment and abuse of power. I included all the documentation of the false police calls and ongoing harassment I had faced. The county initiated an investigation and found that the Neighborhood Association was violating numerous ordinances. They were operating without the necessary permits and oversight. They had unlawfully annexed land beyond their designated boundaries, including parts of my property. As a result, the county imposed sanctions, fines, and probation on the Neighborhood Association Board. Linda was compelled to resign from her position as president. Additionally, I filed a lawsuit against the Neighborhood Association for harassment and legal expenses. My lawyer was confident in our strong case. Upon receiving our lawsuit notice, the Neighborhood Association hurried to settle out of court. They initially offered me a meager $5,000, but I negotiated a $50,000 settlement to compensate for the months of distress. Justice was achieved. The Neighborhood Association is now under stringent county supervision, and Linda, along with her power-seeking associates, are no longer in charge. Interestingly, the value of my property increased once it was officially recognized as outside the Neighborhood Association's jurisdiction. The police commended me for standing up against the association's baseless complaints. I'm pleased that I stood firm against the Neighborhood Association. Some might argue that I won solely through stubbornness, but I prefer to view it as strategic compliance. I turned the Neighborhood Association's tactics against them until they collapsed internally. This experience demonstrates that you don't have to tolerate unreasonable neighborhood associations. With determination and legal resistance, the underdog can prevail. Next is a story of familial revenge. When I was 3, my grandparents passed away. They established a savings account in my name, intended for me to access when I turned 21. By then, it had accumulated just over $300,000. In their letter, they expressed a desire for me to distribute the funds fairly among any other Smith-Jones children, referring to my full siblings. My father is a Smith, and my mother is a Jones. Their definition of fair left the distribution up to my judgment. I never had full siblings, but I do have 2 half-brothers, Mark and Jake Smith, who are my father's children with his current spouse. Due to the specific language my grandparents used, I was not legally required to provide any funds to Mark or Jake. However, considering them as my brothers and recognizing that the money originated from our grandparents, I decided the fairest approach was to allocate $100,000 to each of us, giving us equal lump sums. I planned that when Mark, the younger, turned 21, we could split any remaining funds. Upon turning 21, my father suggested I purchase a house with my $100,000. I found a home I adored priced at $130,000 but couldn't secure a mortgage. My father advised me to borrow $30,000 from the account. I agreed, intending to repay it before my brothers turned 21. I've been steadily repaying the loan. The account should now hold $208,000, but due to the withdrawal and subsequent repayment, it's at $195,000, leaving an outstanding balance of $13,000. Recently, Jake turned 21, and as I handed him his $100,000, he noticed the account had less money than expected. I explained that I was going to replenish it before Mark, who is now 19, reached 21. Jake then informed Mark and both boys that I had stolen from them and owed the full $13,000 plus $3,000 in interest, demanding full repayment by the summer, giving me less than 6 months to restore the account to $211,000. I agreed to extend the repayment period to 2 years as initially planned. However, the boys presented a contract stipulating a 6-month repayment period. I refused to sign, as we had agreed on 2 years. They insisted that I resolve it since they believed they were entitled to the money and mentioned seeking legal counsel. Later that day, I received an email from them stating their intention to sue me for $16,000, along with the current account balance and additional damages for emotional distress. By this point, I had already given Jake about $50,000 of his $100,000 because he preferred installments. I responded that legally, they had no claim to any of the funds and, considering their behavior, they had already received what I considered fair. Therefore, the $50,000 was all they would receive. In response, I was inundated with texts, calls, and emails berating me for reneging on our agreement. I decided to block them. They then resorted to social media, accusing me of trying to deprive them of their inheritance and mobilizing our extended family to harass me over the matter, which was largely effective as I received numerous messages. However, I received a message from a man named Chris Smith, who claimed to be my half-brother at 27. I had never met him before, but he provided photos of himself as a child with our father, grandparents, and me. Chris showed me that he also had an account with $150,000 and included a scanned letter from our grandparents stating that the money was intended to be shared fairly among our father's illegitimate children. He also mentioned another half-sibling who is 18. Chris had been searching for me for some time, but only found me after our father shared Jake's post in which I was tagged. We consulted a solicitor to confirm that as legitimate half-siblings, Mark and Jake were not entitled to any funds from Chris's illegitimate child fund. Similarly, as half-siblings, Mark and Jake were not entitled to any funds from my Smith Jones account either. I sent the boys a formal letter instructing them to cease their actions, stop posting about me online, and accept the $50,000 as the entirety of their share. On the day they received the letter, Chris received a private message from our father asking if the boys could have some of Chris's funds. Chris declined and informed our father that we had met. I informed Mark and Jake about Chris and our other half-sibling with Chris's consent. It appears that my grandparents, aware of Chris before their passing, established two separate funds, one for the children my father had with my mother, who was still his wife at the time of their passing, and another for children born from my father's affairs. This was likely done to prevent disputes and ensure fairness. Despite the ongoing issues, I remain steadfast in my decision. The boys have come to understand that I will not relent, causing a rift within their household. Since Jake has all the money and no intention of sharing, Mark feels even more disadvantaged. Additionally, their stepmother was apparently unaware of the other half-siblings or that my half-sister was born after she and our father married. This situation has led to our father relocating to a hotel, as it seems she is preventing him from moving back into the family home. Our father is seeking a long-term living arrangement outside the family residence because it appears she is not allowing him to return. He is pleading with me to reconsider, but honestly, I am done with everyone except Chris and my sister. The following is a story of petty revenge. When I was about 18 or 19, I babysat our neighbor's 3-year-old son. He adored animals, and it was the middle of spring, warm and pleasant. I decided to ask his mother if it would be all right to take him to a petting zoo in the city. Everyone was thrilled, including me, so we went. We had a fantastic time. He received a generous amount of animal feed to enjoy himself. Everything was fine up to that point. No one was staring, and it was clear that I was merely babysitting, not his mother. When the little boy needed to use the restroom, I thought it was no problem to take him to the toilets. There was a long line for the women's bathroom, but since I had to accompany him because he was too young to use the adult facilities alone, we couldn't simply use the men's bathroom, which was empty. I figured waiting in line for a minute or two wouldn't be an issue. Suddenly, a woman named Karen approached me. "Hi, excuse me?" She tapped me on the shoulder. "Yes?" I responded, assuming she might want to skip ahead in the line because her little girl urgently needed to use the restroom. "Is this your child?" she asked. "Oh, no, this is my neighbor's child. I'm just babysitting today," I replied. "Why the heck are you taking him to the bathroom then?" Karen became immediately aggressive. "Excuse me? He needs to use the restroom and is clearly too young to do so by himself. So obviously I'm accompanying him. What am I supposed to do? Let him just pee his pants? This is highly inappropriate. Only his parents should accompany him to the restroom. He is a boy and not your child. Who knows what you might do in there with him?" I was getting increasingly irritated. At that point in my life, I had dealt with plenty of nonsense from people, especially as a nurse where patients can be extremely entitled when things don't go their way. I was fully capable of defending myself verbally and had already lost my temper with her rudeness. I responded loudly, "Do you think I would be looking at his private parts in there? Ew, what the hell? Why do you have to make a bathroom trip with a small child sexual? Do you think about that when taking your girl to the bathroom? Oh my God, would you do things to your girl? That's disgusting. Why would you even think something sexual when thinking about a little boy going to the bathroom?" I delivered these remarks sarcastically, intending to scare her off, but I spoke loudly enough for many people to hear. As a result, everyone looked at her with disgust, whispering and even agreeing with me that her thoughts were inappropriate and that she should leave me alone. Karen appeared mortified and quickly retreated. The lesson here is to allow people to take children to the bathroom peacefully, as I couldn't simply let that poor boy wet his pants. The next story is one of malicious compliance. For some context, this isn't my personal experience, but happened to my father during the 1980s and 1990s. However, I will narrate it in the first person, as expressing it otherwise is challenging in English. In the 1980s, I lost everything. I dropped out of college, my father died of a heart attack, and my mother was emotionally distant. I felt worthless. As a last resort, I saved some money to relocate to another state and start anew. I chose Montana as my new home. Without a college degree, I knew I could only earn a living through manual labor rather than intellectual pursuits. After some searching, I secured a job on a ranch. The ranch owner, whom we'll call Tom, took me under his guidance. He taught me how to ride horses, herd cattle, perform cutting, roping, and various other essential ranch skills. My objective was to save enough for a down payment to purchase a house or at least some land. After approximately 3 years, I had the funds, but I'd grown fond of the ranch and its people, so I decided to stay longer. In the spring of '88, I finally chose to leave. I was completely honest with Tom about my intentions. I informed him that I wanted to buy land to establish my own ranch and potentially settle down and start a family. Being exceptionally supportive, Tom provided me with contacts of individuals selling land. After some time, I selected a plot near Tom's ranch. I secured a loan, purchased the land, and began constructing my house in the summer. By winter, the house was completed, and I planned to build a barn, fences, corrals, and other necessary structures in the following spring. When spring arrived, I returned to work, and by the onset of summer, I found myself with nothing to do. With ample free time while waiting for all the paperwork to be processed, I wasn't willing to spend 2 weeks idly sitting on my porch. Tom had promised that if I ever needed a job, he would offer me one. Although I didn't require the money, I simply had nothing to do. So I approached Tom to see if he needed any assistance. He mentioned that he could use me to lead tours for visitors at his ranch. His ranch was involved not only in cattle, but also offered tours showcasing the pristine nature of the property. I gladly accepted the position, despite not being fond of interacting with people. However, it was better than doing nothing on my porch. The initial days went smoothly. But then, a particularly difficult woman named Karen appeared, disrupting an otherwise pleasant day. I was returning from a tour when I encountered Karen in the middle of the field, yelling at a girl who was also a guide. I didn't know the girl, but in my opinion, anyone who makes someone cry is in the wrong. I approached them and, using the most passive-aggressive tone I could muster, asked, "Good day? What seems to be the problem?" Karen immediately turned her anger towards me, shouting, "This idiot has no respect for the customer's wishes. I want to speak to a manager now." I didn't anticipate such harsh language, but I remained calm despite feeling frustrated. I turned to the girl, who was now crying because Karen had been harsh to her, and said, "Leave her to me. I'll handle this. You take a break and inform Tom that I'll deal with this difficult individual." The girl gave me a thankful smile and rode away. I then addressed Karen, saying, "Ma'am, I can't get you the manager as he's currently busy, but if you'd like, I can continue the tour for you in his place." She responded politely, saying, "Sure, I think even the trees will be better than that incompetent guide." My inner frustration was intense, but I maintained my composure as we proceeded with the tour. Within the first minute, Karen's true nature became evident. She acted as if she knew everything, considering everyone else inferior and expecting everything to be handed to her. As we neared a turnaround point, I presented her with a choice. We could either follow the official route or take the unofficial, shorter path, which had recent bear sightings reported. I informed her that the unofficial route was quite dangerous. Predictably, she vehemently opposed, asserting that she was the most knowledgeable person and knew best. Realizing my trap had been set after about 5 miles on the unofficial path, Karen began screaming and turned incredibly pale, even whiter than paper. A grizzly bear was approaching in the distance. I was aware of the danger I had led us into, but ultimately it was her decision to take that route. I instructed her to make herself as large and loud as possible. I did the same, but the bear continued to approach, growling at us. With each growl, Karen's fear intensified. When the situation became too perilous, I fired a shot from my rifle, startling the bear and causing it to retreat into the woods. Throughout the ride back, Karen continued to accuse me of intentionally endangering her. Admittedly, taking a visitor into an area with recent bear sightings was reckless, but technically, she had chosen that path. I remained silent during the entire ride, trying to suppress my internal laughter. I was internally laughing uncontrollably, knowing that if I looked at her, I would lose control and start laughing out loud. Upon our return, she was trembling and still pale. After securing her horse, she demanded to speak to the manager. I pointed her towards a small building in the distance, and she stormed off, starting to yell at Tom. I could see Tom struggling to contain his laughter. She was insisting that I be fired, but the amusing part was that I wasn't an official employee of Tom's ranch. I was merely doing a favor for a friend, so I couldn't be dismissed. After her tirade, Tom approached me, laughing like a child, and asked, "How did you come up with that, OP?" I began giggling as well and replied, "She made that guide cry, so I wanted to give her special treatment." I was aware of the bear sightings, and it had worked to my advantage. Tom then advised me not to repeat such actions as it was reckless, and I agreed, explaining, "I don't plan on doing it again, but I had a plan in case the bear attacked. My defense would be that I gave her the choice to take a safer path, but since she insisted she knew best, I complied." Tom smiled and walked away. Years later, my father ended up encountering that girl guide again. Her name was Abby, but I now refer to her as Mom. Thank you for reading. I would greatly appreciate it if you could like this story and subscribe for more. We'll connect again soon.